Welcome to the Stibo Systems studio. We're going to have a really nice conversation here today with Adrian Carr, CEO for Stibo Systems. And I am Gustavo Amorim, the CMO for Stibo Systems. Hi, Adrian.
Hi, Gustavo.
Good to have you here.
Nice to be here. Yeah, great to be here.
Wonderful. So how about we start talking about business value? Obviously, from the context of data management. You as a CEO, how do you use data on a day-to-day basis, and what's the value you get from data?
Gustavo, I don't think there's a better place to start than business value, because if you're a company not adding business value, then you're going to become obsolete. You're going to fail. So business value has to be behind all the decisions you make about how you engage with your customers, the processes behind that too. So, you know, that's number one. That business value is the essence of why we're in business. And the minute we start failing, then the next bit is how do you add business value? And I'd argue, I'd be interested in your view, that you need data underneath that to figure out what's good and what's bad. What do you say to that?
It's not about any data. You got to have the proper data, and proper means trustworthy. You need to trust the data. You have a story you always tell people that I love in a meeting you've been to, and then after a certain time. Why don't you tell that story? Because I think it's fascinating.
Oh yeah, it was an internal management meeting a number of years ago, and on the first Monday of every month, we'd review the data, looking back, we'd look at these charts, and on this particular day, the graph, instead of heading up to the right, had plateaued and was dipping. And the leadership team probably spent about 40 minutes discussing and analyzing and what can we do and how do we test this, before someone said, well, have we checked the data? And that was a fantastic learning point, because the data, someone had just made a little mistake in the spreadsheet, and actually everything was fine. But at that moment in time, we'd wasted 40 minutes discussing this thing. So, and you know, the ironic thing in our business is I speak to, 10 plus customers a week, and they don't have it all sorted out. It would be great to think they have, that when they step forward in a direction and know exactly the business value. But we're just people, and we're doing the things that feel right. But often, even our customers, the smartest, biggest companies in the world, have not quite figured out why they're doing something, and that puts them at risk too.
Yeah, so the complexity, right? What you're talking about is the complexity that they need to manage in getting the value from data is potentially something that they need help with.
I'm a big believer in experimenting and having a culture of experimenting, but you can only experiment if you can see the impact of that, which is back to business data. We tried this thing, we ran a marketing campaign, and 3 months later, this happened. Was it good or bad? Do we do more of it? Do we do less of it? So business data is critical to all of that.
So I think trustworthy data is data that you can rely on, that you can make business decisions based on the fact that you know that the data is high quality, is accurate, is complete, is up to date. So you don't have any problems with the data or issues that you're going to find later, because you've done what you needed to do. And the other interesting thing, and I want to hear your thoughts on that, does trustworthy data comes out of nowhere and out of magic, or you got to do some hard work to get there?
Oh, like most things in life, there's hard work involved. Trustworthy data, reliable data, data where you understand the provenance, data where you're not debating whether it's real or not, you're debating what you do. If you take manufacturing or CPG companies producing goods and services that are then sold, transported and sold around the world, is what's selling to whom, which customers are buying it, which raw materials have a bigger impact on product quality. All of that supply chain maps out into a huge network diagram, if you like, that if it's trustworthy, you can make decisions. If it's reliable data, the essence of knowing which products are being bought by which consumers through which channel, that's gold.
So it's very interesting. Through my career, I had moments when you say, guys, this is not based on opinion. Forget opinion. right? And a lot, I think, particularly being a marketing professional, a lot of times things are based on opinion. Let's be honest, right? We think this is going to work, and there is a lot of work to do to have the data you can rely on, to leave opinions on the side, right? And make a business decision that everybody agrees to, not because someone with a bigger title in the room is saying something, but because it's what the data is telling you, right? And that is absolutely critical. So let me get maybe your insights into one particular area, right? Which is, you talked about this notion of you need to know what customers are buying which products. Let me call that a little bit of a customer experience, right? Building and creating a customer experience. In working with Stibo Systems customers, is that a key area that you see them creating business value from, trustworthy data?
Yeah, I mean, hugely. It's, it starts with the product and manufacturing process, but the snowball of trustworthy data, builds momentum as it kind of rolls down the hill, stretching the analogy.
I love the snowball effect. I'm going to use that.
It's a long way from here, snow right now, but the snowball, you've got the product data, so you know what you've made and the components, ingredients, etc. But then when you add, the supply chain data and suppliers, and then the consumer information and distribution, then suddenly you've got a wealth of data. And actually, we're going to bridge to AI because the legacy analytics doesn't necessarily have the horsepower to deal with all of that. That's a big ask. Right. So stretching that and taking into new technologies such as AI to say, okay, what don't I know about this data? What can we learn?
So what you're talking about, if I'm hearing you right, you're describing customer experience very holistically, because you talked about products, you talked about suppliers, obviously you talked about the customer itself, but very holistically. And then you're adding the power of AI to actually bring the automation and the capabilities to predict things, and that then becomes heaven, I would guess.
Consumers have a predictable pattern, and especially when you've got hundreds, thousands, millions of them. A customer gets a new product that they're not happy with, they visit a certain page on the website where they pick up a cookie, they call the call center, the lights flash saying this customer is likely to cancel.
Right.
So what do you do? So now you've got the data, you've got pattern data, you test that data and react. It reminds me of a little story of a colleague, and this was only a couple of months ago, and he's been struggling with another function internally to get them to believe what he was saying. And just recently I sat there, I said, well, how is that going? And he says, he's had a wonderful smile, and he said, it's got a lot easier. I said, what's made it easier? He says, the data. They've stopped arguing with the data. And so, the critical thing is about turning data into action.
Right. So
we've spent some time on the trustworthy data and moving into the analysis, but the end point is, so what do we do?
So Adrian, we have to talk about AI, even if we didn't want it to, but we do want to, right? Because it's a really interesting topic. So there's one point that we actually run some research that shows that might be being neglected a little bit as companies embark on their AI journeys, which is the readiness piece, which I know is one you're passionate about. What's your take on that?
Yeah, you're right. We can't avoid talking about AI, and it's going to change the world we live in. So readiness, and I have a passion for this because we get fixated on the technology, but actually it's the readiness of individuals and companies to adapt to change. The world will change, and some companies will fail as a consequence of technology because they're not ready. And so, readiness involves having a culture of innovation, a willingness to experiment, and there's technology and agility in technology, and of course trustworthy data. And well, AI is going to bring opportunities. There have been changes in our recent past that have brought threats, such as the pandemic. And so all of this readiness to change can also be defensively deployed against how do we survive a pandemic. But for AI, I see that we'll go through these loosely 3 stages. One is fear, and I think as businesses we're coming through that. The second is a level of what's now being called hyper-automation, about automating the steps that we do maybe manually or using technology but still with manual intervention. So second, hyper-automation of what we're doing already. But the big one, and I haven't really come across companies that have embraced this yet, which is, ask the big questions. Why are we actually doing all of this? Should our business exist? Is there a different way? And so this is going to take years to play out. But being ready and having data and technology in the mindset will turn it into an opportunity and not a threat.
Absolutely. So we have some research we've done at Stibo Systems that actually show that 80% of the people who were interviewed say that they need more training to be able to deal with AI. And then the one area that came up also was the ethical side, the ethical dilemmas of AI. So I'm going to get a little philosophical here with you now. So when you think about the role of the readiness, not only on the technology side, but on the people, the human side, and looking into these ethical dilemmas, right? Is that something that keeps you up at night as well?
So I think we're going to go on a journey, a phrase I overuse, adventure with AI, and ethics is going to come into it more and more. And there's a place for regulation in that. And what typically happens is regulation is lagging behind the innovation of technology. When you look at autonomous driving cars, there will be circumstances where a split-second decision is needed that could have consequences on maybe pedestrians or the impact of an accident that's unavoidable. And someone's got to code that or guide the AI on how to make that decision. And these are decisions we make in our lives kind of more automatically, but to code those, you've got to have a value judgment, and then you've suddenly got ethics involved.
So we've been talking about a lot of things, right? We talked about even ethical dilemmas of AI. And we are a master data management company. Stibo Systems is a master data management company. So how does that play into trustworthy data, AI and readiness? How do you see all that kind of coming together? Is there a connection?
There's definitely a connection. I mean, look at it holistically. It's kind of layers. Having the data is one thing, and the technology systems that are catching the data. Master data management is about turning that data into trustworthy data to make decision-making possible. Applying the technology and the kind of mental insight, if you like, to deploy AI on top of trustworthy data gives you the chance to, again, experiment and try different things and know what's happened, what's changed, what the impact is. And so, we come back to master data management. It's about readiness to deal with opportunities and threats, to scale a business, to survive. Some companies will fail if they don't move fast enough. We don't quite know what's around the corner. The best we can do really is to be ready.
Yeah, I agree with you. In this readiness, we currently have some use cases in our solutions, which as a marketing professional, I find them absolutely fascinating. So we have this thing called AI-generated product descriptions, that from within your master data, you can generate descriptions for your product based on AI. So you can automate certain tasks that your team now can spend their time and energy in doing other things, which are more value add. So it's fascinating how much we can work with the capabilities behind the technology, but always with a business angle view, right? So we always go back to that. We always go back to the business angle and how do you drive business value. So how do you see, as the CEO of Stibo Systems, this industry moving, right? And what, in a way, do you believe that makes Stibo Systems a little unique in this space?
So the industry, I think in terms of the technology, is moving forwards, which is good, but I think there's a rapid acceleration that's going to happen, especially with AI, that's ahead of us. And I think companies that are, some of the leading manufacturers, CPG retailers, are getting closer to what that helps them do. But I don't think anyone's cracked that yet. I think the opportunity is still out there. I think we're really scratching at the surface, tip of the iceberg, whatever analogy you want. But being ready, moving forward, experimenting is critical. And that's what we see happening in the marketplace. Companies are doing that, but all the time tied back to the business value. We learn a lot about the future by looking at the past, and I'm seasoned enough, I'm choosing that word, to remember when the internet happened. And to start with, it didn't seem that relevant. And yet it's transformed the way we work and trade and as individuals and as companies. And the same is going to happen. And so I think being curious is critical to that. That we don't have, whatever business you're in, we're in, it's not perfect right now. Look for the next thing. Embrace the technology. I heard a tech firm recently announce that 84% of their employees use AI every day. That's a great beginning, because by you doing that and being curious, you'll discover better ways to do business, better ways to deliver value to your customers.
Very good. With that, thanks for watching. And if you enjoy the conversation, make sure you hit the like button, and please subscribe to the Stibo Systems channel.
Thanks for watching. If you want more content like this, subscribe to the Stibo Systems YouTube channel.